We open on a flashback to a scene from 2019 Avengers Endgame, which depicts Iron Man and Ant-Man traveling back to 2012 to retrieve the Tesseract from their past selves immediately after the events of the Avengers. They fail, scatter the Tesseract on the floor, and Loki, in manacles and a weird bondage mouthpiece, surreptitiously scoops up the Tesseract and teleports away. The Marvel credits roll, and Loki materializes in the Gobi Desert. He fails to impress his godhood on a bunch of Mongolian nomads, when an orange portal opens up and some heavily armed agents climb out. They identify Loki as a variant, and arrest him in the name of the Time Variance Authority. When he refuses to come quietly, a stocky woman hits him in the jaw and slows his personal time flow down to 1 divided by 16th its normal rate, allowing her to easily slap a collar on him that looks even more kinky than the mouthpiece. His lips flap comically from the impact. On the other side of the orange portal is a 60-ish office full of retro-modernist design. Loki tries to run away, but his captor keeps teleporting him back a few seconds in time so he can't go anywhere. He's shoved into a closet where a robot removes his clothes and puts him into a prison jumpsuit and ushers him through a series of bureaucratic check-ins. Finally, he ends up in a waiting room, where a friendly Hanna-Barbera-esque cartoon tells him that the Time Variance Authority was created by the Time Keepers in the wake of a time war, to police the timeline and arrest any variants who branch off it. This whole thing strikes Loki as rather comical, until he sees a guy in front of him get vaporized for not following the rules. The next scene takes place in 1500 France, and Time Variance Authority investigator Owen Wilson is looking at some bodies on the floor of a church. It appears that someone has been murdering TVA agents and taking the devices that they use to reset the timeline after their visits. A boy informs Owen that a devil did it, and it seems that devil also gave him some 20th century bubble gum. Loki is led into a courtroom and read his charges by Time Judge Ravonna Renslayer. He protests that he's not guilty of crimes against the timeline. He only escaped because the Avengers traveled through time first. But the judge says the Avengers' time travel was part of the approved timeline, unlike Loki's escape. Loki finds this tedious and tries to use his illusion powers to escape, but they don't work on TVA premises. He's about to be sentenced to be reset, but Owen, sitting in the courtroom behind him, intercedes on his behalf. Owen introduces himself as Agent Mobius and takes Loki into an interview room. He activates a holographic viewer that plays some of the greatest hits of Loki's life thus far and is basically just footage from the movies. Mobius challenges his alleged principles, his view of a naturally hierarchical universe, and contends instead that Loki just likes to hurt and dominate others. To convince him, Mobius plays some scenes from the future of Loki's natural timeline, which he also calls the sacred timeline. First, it shows how he killed Agent Coulson. Second, it shows how in his subjective future, he mistakenly gets his foster mother Frigga killed by selling out the palace to the Dark Elves. At this, Loki gets real mad, charges at Mobius, and gets reverse zapped for his efforts. The time agent who apprehended Loki, Agent B-15, appears in the middle of questioning to report a situation. The situation is merely that the top time brass thinks Loki's dangerous, wants him gone, and doesn't approve of Mobius using him in this fashion, all of which we already knew, and the characters do too. But the unnecessary interruption gives Loki time to snatch Mobius's time zapper thinger and escape into a Mad Men workspace with lots of retro typewriters and lamps. The guy who was working the front desk when Loki came in, Casey, is accosted by Loki and threatened with painful, violent death unless he gives back the Tesseract. Casey opens the lock to a regular file drawer, where Loki is somewhat discomfited to discover the Tesseract among many timelines, worth of confiscated Infinity Stones, none of which work in the TVA, which is outside normal time and space. With a useless Tesseract in his possession, Loki unzaps time back to the interview room, where, finding himself alone, he dials up some more scenes from the sacred timeline. He watches his mother's treacherous death one more time. He fast-forwards to his father's death, and his newfound bond with his brother Thor, and finally his own death at the hands of Thanos at the beginning of Avengers: Infinity War. Hunter B-15 finds him in the interview room, but Loki gets the drop on her, slaps his own fetish collar on her, and uses the tiny doodle to bat her around like a four-dimensional cat and finally zap her back to the workspace. Mobius meets him here. Loki confesses that he doesn't actually enjoy hurting people. He has to, he says, because it's all part of the illusion he projects to look powerful and inspire fear in others. Mobius says he understands, and as a show of good faith, he wants to offer Loki a constructive purpose in this universe, hunting down another variant, one who's killing Minutemen. He says Loki might have particular insight into this variant, because it just so happens to be a Loki from another timeline. Cut to Oklahoma, 1858. The Minutemen are on the trail of an unauthorized time traveler from the early 3rd millennium. The head Minuteman smells crude oil on the ground, theorizes that the traveler wanted to jumpstart an oil boom several decades early to get rich. He advises the team to just set a temporal charge and detonate the timeline to save the hassle of hunting the guy down. Suddenly, a hooded figure drops a lantern on the ground, sets the whole team ablaze, and steals the charge for himself.